Hold up. Better late low.
Some stuff, you just gotta see it to believe it.
Look at this. Somebody come look at this.
But it ain't nothing like hearing it straight from the dog's mouth, because he tells it just like it is.
The word on the street. Here's what's poppin'.
Here's what's poppin', people. My name is Dogface Calderon. This is Dogface TV podcast live on Patreon, Discord, YouTube, and starting Monday of next week, I will be on Apple Podcast and Spotify Podcast. I want to welcome you. No, we're not talking about Auntie Juanita today. Why would I continue to do that? Although I do got a belt to pull out in his ass a little later. Right now, it ain't about that. Right now, it's providing substantive, quality journalism via my unique perspective. We have not covered the 2024 presidential election. I have been derelict and negligent in my responsibilities as a qualified podcast, YouTube, urban journalist. We got to talk about the landslide victory for the GOP in the 2024 elections. And when I say the 2024 elections, I'm not just talking about the presidential elections, because there was a drubbing that is like white people language for an ass whooping. There was a ass whooping that took place last week, about 2 weeks ago now. Let me tell you people something, right? They said, well, Dogface, people have been weighing in, asking me questions about what I think about what happened and why I think it happened. Let me tell you, let me share my perspectives and my insight with you, and hopefully you will take away from that something that you could use to form an understanding of why the Democratic Party, they didn't just lose. Let's just make sure we're on the same page with that. It wasn't just a loss in the traditional sense of the word, losing as it relates to an election, whether it is state, local, federal, doesn't matter. This wasn't just a loss. What this was an exposing. The Democratic Party was exposed at its core for its lack of understanding what the people in this country held near and dear to their hearts. What happened with the landslide election, it wasn't just, it's not about what the Republicans did right, in so much as it is about what the Democratic Party did wrong, and not just doing Kamala Harris's run for president. It's not, this issue is a systematic issue that it spans and it reaches further than just the presidential campaign ran by the DNC and Kamala Harris. It's more than that. If you're just focused on the presidential election, you lose right there. You lose right there. If you are hooping and hollering, and if you are complaining, and if you are acting like you don't understand how it happened, that's the problem right there. If you are a supporter of all things Democratic, or all things the Democratic Party, the DNC in this country, if you are a supporter of the philosophical ideology of what the Democratic Party champions, and if you don't understand, especially after having a couple of weeks to sit back and reflect on what went wrong, if you don't understand what happened and how the party failed the country, then you are in trouble, because it doesn't take much to understand how and why they suffered an ass kicking just like that. You say, well, Dogface, what do you mean? What I mean is this. 4 years ago, when Joe Biden, when the Biden Harris campaign started. Joe Biden suffered mightily during the Democratic primary debates. Kamala Harris was a forerunner of inflicting damage to Joe Biden's tenure as a state senator, his tenure as a governor, and his tenure as a vice president underneath Barack Obama's presidency. Joe Biden was already a weakened candidate, right? Based on everything that he has represented for the past 50 years that he's been an elected official, right? I've never been a fan of Joe Biden, but I'm going to try to be as non-biased as I possibly can because I remember the real Joe Biden. I can remember that as a state senator, Joe Biden's one of his mentors was Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, right? For those of you who don't know, you're too young, you're not a student of politics like I am. Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina was the last segregationist, openly racist senator to serve in the U.S. Senate. He was one of the staunchest defenders of segregation. He was one of the most critical opponents of everything from Brown versus the Board of Education to any form of legislation from, it wasn't just, Strom Thurmond, this is who he was. He was anti-affirmative action. He was anti-Brown versus the Board of Education. He was anti-civil rights legislation. He was one of the main people who criticized and tried to author bills that would stop people like Medgar Evers, like Malcolm X, like Martin Luther King. He was one of the main proponents of all things racist as it relates to the political spectrum in this country, right? That was Joe Biden's mentor. They say that, well, one of the things that happened was the crime bill, I believe, of 1994 came up again. I don't care what bill you mention. If it's a piece of legislation that went against anything that supported or gave any difference to minority people in this country, specifically Black people and Latinos, Senator Strom Thurmond was completely and totally against it. And that mentality is spilled over into the political philosophies and ideologies of Joe Biden. One of Joe Biden's most critical opponents on his side of the aisle, right, was the honorable representative from California, Maxine Waters. I remember when the crime bill came up and there was a question about the disparities in sentencing between crack cocaine and powdered cocaine. What they said was that because of the effect that crack cocaine was having on the inner city and the possibility of that scourge spilling out into rural areas and into the suburbs, they were in fear of that. So they created legislation that they passed under Bill Clinton's administration, as a matter of fact, right? They pushed it through, and I can remember Maxine Waters screaming at the top of her lungs that policy and that bill, the crime bill that we're talking about here, which one of the things it did was it criminalized it created sentencing guideline disparages between people who were convicted of possession of and distribution of powdered cocaine and crack cocaine. What that meant is that you can get more time for getting caught with 1 ounce of crack cocaine than you would get if you get caught with 1 kilogram of powder cocaine. It is absolutely true. And the author no other than Senator Joe Biden. I can remember distinctly Maxine Waters from California screaming at the top of her lungs that if that bill passed, that it would lead to an overwhelming influx of black and brown people who are more likely to be in possession of crack, which was known as more of an urban drug, whereas powdered cocaine, in terms of sniffing it, snorting it, playing with your nose, that was like a rich person's drug, right? I can remember her, Maxine Waters, and other like-minded individuals, right? I can remember it like it was yesterday, how they were tearing Joe Biden a new asshole for his position on that crime bill. The downfall of the Democratic Party has been a long time coming. It didn't just start with this election. Please don't think that to be true, because it's not. Joe Biden historically is a racist motherfucker. I know people like to come down on Donald Trump for his obvious displays of what we all know can be qualified as nothing other than acute, accurate, concentrated racism. But I want you people to know and understand that Donald Trump, on his worst day, is not a worse enemy to black people in this country on his worst day. What he did and what he did during his 4-year tenure as president, right? It pales in comparison to what Senator Joe Biden did in his 30 plus years as a senator. Joe Biden was responsible for altering some of the most harmful legislation that this country has seen since coming out of Reconstruction. Plain and simple. That is an inarguable fact. You can hoop and holler all day. It just is what it is. Kamala Harris, she was put in an uncomfortable situation, not of her own doing, but she was the absolute wrong candidate to run against Trump. You couldn't have picked, the DNC could not have picked a worse candidate. However, let me tell you what happened. 4 years ago, when Joe Biden ran for office, he ran for office on the backdrop of all the crazy ass shit that Donald Trump was into. We knew that Donald Trump ass was out of there based on the January 6th debacle, how he handled Putin, how he handled the country, a lot of the insensitive comments that he made specifically about things that affected non-white people in this country. We knew it, we saw it, we understood it. We get it, we understand. But when Joe Biden ran, when he ran as a one-term president who was supposed to stand in as a stopgap, it was supposed to be, he was supposed to represent the old guard. And what he was supposed to do, and what the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, was supposed to be doing during his 4-year tenure after he won, was grooming somebody else to step forward to represent the Democratic Party. That's what they were supposed to be doing. If you can recall, he said that we need some semblance of regal authority. We need some symbol of traditional political strength, acumen to reshape or refocus the country back to where we thought it should be from a customarily traditional standpoint. He was never supposed to run again. But let me tell you what happened. All of the political pundits, all of them, from Democratic to Republican to Independent to Green Party to whoever, they thought that during the midterm elections 2 years ago, right, because the Biden administration from the very beginning doing a horrible job, right? Everything from border crossings, everything from the conflict, the war between Russia and Ukraine, everything from the Palestinian and Israeli relations, from Hamas, relationships from the Golan Heights to everything, right? They thought that because of how much instability the world was experiencing 2 years ago, that the Red Party, the Republican Party, would take over the Senate even further than what they had, and that they would take over the House. 2 years ago, that's what they thought. They thought, because normally what happens is that the ruling party normally always loses seats during the midterm election. So a midterm election happens every 2 years, right? So this is when you have the majority of the senators and the House Republicans, they are up for re-election in waves. So normally the ruling party, the party that sits in the Oval Office, they normally lose ground during the midterm elections, which happen every 2 years. That didn't happen. 2 years ago, all of the prognosticators said that the Democrats would lose footing in the Senate and lose footing in the House, but that did not happen. So what happened was that sent a signal to the DNC that we didn't lose like we anticipated. We didn't lose like the prognosticators said we were going to lose during the midterm elections 2 years ago. So maybe the course that we are traveling, maybe that might be a course that the American public may be able to digest, which will take us home 2 years from now, which is a couple of weeks ago, 2024. It was a horrible overestimation of what the results of the midterm election 2 years really represented. They grew confident. And don't forget, Joe Biden ran as a one-term candidate. He was supposed to be a stopgap between what we experienced with Donald Trump, right? And everybody was saying 2 years ago or 4 years ago that he was too old to sit in that seat. But when you looked at the options that we had, we didn't have any other viable candidates. Coming off of the success that he experienced or not with under the Obama administration, he was the most viable, most sellable candidate, right? 2 years ago, the Democratic Party, they misunderstood what was going on in the country. They did not read, or they did not have their finger on the pulse of what mattered most to the people of this country. Let me tell you what happened. It was not that the Republican Party got everything right. It's not a story about how right they were, how ingenious they were, right? It's not the issue. Because let me tell you what we have right now. We have a Republican-controlled or a Trump-controlled presidency. Not only did he win by a landslide, right? The U.S. Senate turned totally crimson red. The House of Representatives turned red. And we already know that the U.S. Supreme Court is more conservative in terms of the justices that sit on that bench. So the four branches of government of this country, the presidency, the U.S. Senate, the House, and the Supreme Court are all fucking ran by Republicans or people who identify as Republicans. It was a landslide across the board. How did that happen? Let me tell you how it happened. One, Joe Biden, 2 years ago, he was supposed to prop up either Kamala Harris or some other front-running candidate to run for office. He waited. He decided that, hey, listen, we didn't do so bad during the midterms 2 years ago, so let's give the American public more of what we've been giving them for the last 2 years. That's what he said 2 years ago. We didn't experience the losses that we thought we would, or that we anticipated that we would. So maybe the American people are loving or are enough in favor of what we're doing, and maybe that whole feeling and emotion will carry us into the next election, which was a couple of weeks ago. No. This is not a story about what the Republicans did right. This is a story, and this will go down in the annals of history as a story of just how out of fucking touch the Democratic Party is with what the fuck is going on in this country. Kamala Harris was doomed from the word go, because think about it. Joe Biden, instead of him propping her up, instead of him and the DNC trying to push forward with some political strategy that would win over people, so those people would associate what the direction the country had turned in with something or anything that was inspired or led by the wisdom and the insight of one Kamala Harris. Joe Biden decided to run again 2 years ago. Fatal flaw. That fatal flaw became more and more abundant during the presidential debate that he had with Donald Trump. He was ineffective. He was not clear and concise. And his age and his mental state, it bore through. It cut through like like a hot knife through a stick of fucking butter. The Democratic Party, on top of having a flawed candidate like Joe Biden, who was experiencing mental degradation, the likes of which we haven't seen since after Ronald Reagan got shot. We all knew, everybody knew, both sides of the political aisle knew that Joe Biden didn't have the mental acumen, the mental strength, the mental dexterity to move forward and to lead us into another 4-year term. We knew and understood that 2 years ago. We knew and understood it 4 years ago. But Trump did such a horrible job on the surface in terms of bringing people together and properly communicating what his message was. He basically allowed his presidency to be hijacked by people who were on the far right fringes of everything, from Bill Barr to the Kellyanne Conway chick to all those fucking clowns, right? Kamala Harris, in this country that we live in now, America is still a predominantly white, predominantly Anglo-Saxon, predominantly Caucasian society. This country that we live in is still controlled in every aspect by white men. You sprinkle in a little white women for flavor, but really this is still the white man's country. I don't give a fuck how many Mexicans you bring in this motherfucker. I don't give a fuck how many Nigerians I don't give a fuck who you bring in this bitch. The white man still runs this motherfucking country. Period. Point blank. And on top of that, a lot of the other nationalities, they still do not favor being led by a woman. But what was the Democratic Party to do? Because if they would have tried to replace Kamala Harris with anybody else, the criticism would have rung so loudly that you reached around a sitting vice president to choose somebody who's from a lesser rung of the political scope to take her place. Let me tell you something, bro. If you think black people were upset doing her year, less than a year, because it was just this year that Joe Biden decided to step aside. So Kamala Harris had less than really like 6 months to run. She was never going to recover from not being the front runner for at least 2 years to go against Trump. We know what this country thinks about Trump. She was never going to be able to overcome the disadvantage that she had by the DNC not propping her up 2 years ago during the midterm election. She was never going to be able to overcome that, especially not when you look at the condition of this country. Let's talk about the condition of this country. And let's talk about how the Democratic Party and all things Democrat got this shit wrong. It is not what the Republicans got right. It is we need to examine all the shit that the Democrats did wrong. Number one, there was no active legislation. When you're trying to sell Kamala Harris as a black woman or a woman of mixed heritage, and you try to run with the black card, that's the first mistake. Don't forget, this country is still controlled by white men in every aspect. So when you try to run, Barack Obama only got away with that shit because there was no real viable candidate on the Republican side of things. All of those sons of bitches was horrible, right? So Barack Obama had the popular. He was a safe candidate. There's nothing threatening or alarming about him. He was a Democratic centrist. He was easy to work with. And at that particular point in time, that's what this country needed. I get it. I understand. Kamala Harris, not so much. They said that one of the things that hurt her during her 6-month campaign to run for the most powerful office in the world, right, was they didn't focus more on her political history in the state of California, which is where she comes from. So, head prosecutor, attorney general of that state, so U.S. Senator. Kamala Harris, when you're trying to sell her as the champion for black people or even black women, Kamala Harris's track record in the state of California from which she came from is absolutely fucking abysmal. I don't have time on this program to state how much legislation as a senator that she was responsible for championing and pushing forward that had the most negative consequences to black and brown people of that state. Kamala Harris did not come out of that state as a champion. She did not. I don't know any black people of serious consequence from the state of California who dealt with anything black, from civil rights to people who champion legislation that would put black people in a good position. I don't know any serious politician or political pundit who had the best interest of black and brown people in mind, who thought that Kamala Harris was the best choice to even sit as vice president under the Biden-Harris administration, let alone run for president. Okay. Let's look at all the things the Democrats got wrong. One, let me tell you first, I have a story to tell you, right? Now, I'm not trying to be the biggest thug in the world, and I'm not trying to say that I'm absolutely criminal-minded, but let me tell you when I developed a real liking for Donald Trump, tell you, right? When he said the FBI, the DEA, Homeland Security, when he said there was some crooked motherfuckers, I ain't never seen a serious politician who hoped to win anything say that challenge the FBI in that way. I ain't never seen it. When he said what everybody in the black community already knew, that the DEA, the FBI, the Homeland Security, and basically every other form of federal law enforcement was crooked and underhanded and rigged. When he said that, I seen motherfuckers who call themselves gangsters. I ain't voting for Trump. Trump racist. When Trump said the FBI was some crooked motherfuckers, the CIA was some crooked, underhanded, deceitful, lying motherfuckers. When he said Homeland Security was a joke, the DEA was a bunch of dope fiends to motherfucking selves. Do away with that ATF shit. How can you be a street nigga? How can you be, I know I'm being childish here though, but how can you be a street nigga and not love that? How? How could you not love that? Right there, right? See, because I vote for the people or the person who's going to champion what I want to see happen. I wanted him to sabotage the FBI. I wanted him to sabotage and undermine Homeland Security, DEA, and ATF because I am a retired criminal. And even though I am no longer an active criminal, you can take the nigga out the hood, but you can't take the hood out the nigga. You can take the thug out the, but you can't take the, you get where I'm coming from, right? This is where the Democratic Party got wrong. All of the issues they chose to put at the forefront of the campaign, that shit was all wrong. Let me tell you what Kamala Harris lost me. I was never a fan of hers, by the way, but I was willing to give her a shot because she is Indian and Jamaican, and I view that, even though Indians don't view themselves as, we know that Indians come from us, whether it's Native American Indians or whether it is Bangladeshi dot in the middle of Fohi Indians, they come from black people, even though they don't act like it. Even though their whole psyche is anti all things black, in this country especially, we still know where their origins come from. Get that. When Kamala Harris said, I'm going to favor legislation to pay for transgender prisoners who are incarcerated who want to have sex changes.
You big dummy. You big dummy. You big dummy. You big cold-blooded dummy. You big dummy. See what you did? Oh, no, you big dummy.
Kamala Harris, who in the fuck told you to get on national TV and say that you're going to take taxpayers' dollars to pay for sex changes for transgender men who identify themselves as women who are incarcerated? Who in the fuck in the DNC, Who in the fuck on this planet? Yo, Douglas, did your husband Douglas tell you that was some good shit to do and say? What in the fuck does a sex change, whether a motherfucker is a prisoner or not a prisoner? How in the world did you fathom in your mind? Who allowed you to get up on national TV and say that you're going to draft legislation that would require the American citizens to use their tax dollars to pay for sex changes of people who are incarcerated if they choose to do so? Who the fuck told you? Hey, listen, and this is not Dogface's anti-LGBT community. No. If you decide, or if you are of the mind frame that you were not born in the right body, if you're a man and you identify yourself as a woman, that's on you. If you're a woman and you say, hey, I should have been born a man, I like a little pussy, that's on you. I can't even knock it. I like pussy too. Who am I, right, to tell a woman who just acts like pussy that she can't like no pussy when pussy is as good as it is? Can't touch that, right? So if you decide that you feel like you were born in the wrong body and you want to correct what you believe psychologically is wrong with you physically, if you want to do that, have at it. Far be it from me to tell you what you can't do. But when you get to talking about the general public should pay for it, you might be going a little bit too far, Kamala Harris. DNC. The DNC stands for Dumb Nigga Convention. And niggas are not just black people. Niggas mean, according to white people, when they try to clean it up, no, white people say, well, nigger don't mean black people. Nigger just means ignorant. Let's run with that. Let's run with that. DNC stands for Dumb Nigga Convention. That's what it stands for. Because white people say nigga don't mean black people. Nigga just means ignorance. Despite the fact that they call niggas ignorant, whatever. But the DNC stands for Dumb Nigga Convention. Who told you dumbass niggas in that convention that who did you think you were? Who did you think you were? What you call that word? Pandering to. Who did you think that you were saying something that the majority of the citizens who are able to vote in this country wanted to hear? We're going to pay for sex changes of incarcerated prisoners if they choose to do so? No, nigga. If you want to get your slung cut off, get your ass out of jail, get a job, and have at it. If you are a woman and you decide that you want to get your breast cut off, if you decide you want to have them put you a floppy disk down there, right, surgically speaking, have at it. But the general public and the taxpayers should not be paying for that shit. And as a black man, who deal with black people, men and women, old and young, on a constant, consistent basis, I ain't heard not one black people, even black people who are homosexual, they was like, what? So you're gonna use you're gonna use our tax dollars to pay for surgeries for people who identify themselves as the opposite sex? No, nigga, no. When you led with that you almost led, then you led with the abortion. Listen, most black people in this country are more conservative than you think. I, for one, I don't believe that the federal government should be in the business of deciding whether or not a woman can have an abortion, when, where, how, under what circumstances. I don't believe that is the federal government's job. However, I do believe that states can have the authority, states should have the authority to decide whether they want to allow different aspects of lifestyle decisions to be allowed. I do recognize that because of the history of this country, when you have pockets and states and regions that are racist, homophobic, misogynistic, I do recognize that the federal government has to step in to create a uniform standard, because if we leave it, just like the civil rights, the federal government had to step in, because if you were left up to Mississippi, niggas would still be in slavery. If you were left up to Arkansas, niggas would still be in slavery. If you were left up to Georgia, see, people think about Georgia, think about Atlanta. Atlanta does not represent Georgia, bro. Atlanta represents a small pocket, The majority of Georgia is red as a motherfucker, right? If you would have left it up to each individual state to make a determination of whether or not black people could vote or even women could vote or not, then we would still be 200 years in the past. So I get it. I understand that the federal government has a place to represent the citizens in this country as a whole. And I'm not saying I'm anti-abortion. I don't think, but I'm not completely and totally anti-abortion. Here's what I am. I do not feel like it is right, in my own personal opinion, for women to lay down and have sex without protection, whether it's condom or birth control. I know some women can't use condoms because it irritates them, no matter what, whether it's lamb skin, sheep skin, goat skin, or pig skin. I get it. I know some women have problems with contraceptives, whether it's birth control, whatever the case may be. So I get it, right? But I don't believe that you should be laying down free fucking with no worries in the world. And then once the consequence of you free fucking is a baby, I don't think that you should be able to, you should be allowed to just kill baby after baby after baby after baby. I don't think that. I'm not going to say unalive shit. Oh, Dogface, you should say unalive. No, fuck that. I don't think that a woman should, who is your body. So listen, women, you got to take responsibility for this shit. Hey, women, black, brown, green, blue, light, dark, whatever. Don't matter. I don't feel like it's right or it's fair for you to be able to lay down and have sex time and time again and then kill baby after baby after baby. Why not just utilize some proactive measure that would more likely than not prevent you from getting pregnant to begin with? If you don't want a child, why not use a contraceptive? Something has to work for you, whether it's a condom, whether it's birth control, something has to work. I don't think it's fair, because you wouldn't be here if somebody didn't decide to give you a chance at life. Nobody in my generation would be here because Roe versus Wade went into effect in, I think, 1972. If it's not 1972, then it's absolutely the early 1970s, where it gave women the right to choose no matter what the man said. It was a woman's right to choose whether she wanted to carry that child and birth that child. And a man couldn't do nothing about it at all, period. Even if he was married, it's still the woman's choice. I don't feel like somebody gave you a chance. What type of society would we be if we constantly promote, as a consequence of you purposefully laying down and having sex and fucking like a motherfucker, as a consequence of that, you're going to kill baby after baby after baby? I don't think that's right. That's just me, right? Somebody gave your ass a chance. With all the fucking you've been doing, don't forget that somebody gave you a chance to make something of yourself by birthing your sorry ass into this world. Right? Okay. Now that I said that, right? I expect the criticism, right? So I'm not pro-abortion, right? And I'm not completely against abortion. I do believe that people should take accountability and responsibility for what they do. I don't believe that you should be able to just be fucking and fucking and fucking. I know some women who had 8, 9, 10 abortions. Now, come on, sis. Come on now. You just gonna kill all them kids, not give nobody no chance? But it's a woman's right to choose. So as long as it's a woman's right to choose, so be it. However, flip side of that, right? I am not completely anti-abortion because I do believe that there are some circumstances wherein which a woman should be allowed to terminate the life of a child. And those conditions and circumstances are if a woman is raped or molested. Also, if through DNA testing, if through medical observation, it is determined that your child is going to be born, it's going to be unpopular, but I'm going to say this. If it is determined through DNA testing and or medical observation that your child is going to be born with a debilitating birth defect, which is going to complicate their lives to the point to where they're basically living inside of a cage psychologically or physically, I believe that a woman should have the right to make a decision because it's not just about caring for a child. When you're dealing with somebody who has severe handicaps or severe birth deformities, I believe that if a woman can make a determination of what that's going to be, even though I'm not saying that somebody with a birth defect or a handicap can't grow on to be somebody great, but I do believe that it should be a woman's right to choose if she wants to deal with that because of the extra added pressures that comes with caring for somebody with special needs. I really do. I really do believe that in those circumstances, right? Because if a woman is raped, that's not like she consensually laid down with the man and then as a consequence of that, she conceived the baby. No. So I am not completely anti-abortion and I am not completely pro-abortion. I'm somewhere in the middle. If you are violated as a woman in some way, if you're raped, molested in some way, I don't believe that you should be forced to keep a child that was conceived out of something so horrific as that. I believe it should be a woman's right to make a determination of whether she could deal with that or not, right? Somebody might say, well, dog, she should just, so I know some people who are completely anti-abortion who says just have the baby and if you don't want it, put it up for adoption. But I don't think that a woman who has been raped, molested, or violated in any way should be forced to carry full term of life that she did not play a part in consensually conceiving. I don't think that's fair. And I think the trauma of birthing that child into existence, into this world, would be more detrimental and more harmful to that woman because she's already had to suffer the indignity of being raped and abused. So, Democratic Party chose to hang their hats on abortion. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade as a national addendum and left the choice up to the states. And a lot of states, especially the southern states, we knew were going to ban and outlaw abortion outright. And then there was a caveat put in place that said that if you were a citizen or resident of a particular state, you couldn't just cross state lines to have an abortion, right? So I get that, just as a safeguard, because what it was going to do is just create a situation where if Mississippi outlawed abortions, then okay, if I get pregnant in Mississippi, I'm gonna go to fucking Kansas City to get an abortion. So they put stopgaps in place to stop that and prevent that from happening according to where you resided at, according to your physical ID. I get it. The Democratic Party chose to hang their hats on abortion. I get it. Roe versus Wade is a serious issue, but even though as serious of an issue and as much of a blow that was when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, you still didn't examine the mindset and the temperature of the people in 2024, 2023. So you chose to go with sex changes for transgender people, which is completely their right to do. However, not at the expense of the taxpayers. That is a personal choice that should be funded by, paid for by the individuals who choose to do that. It shouldn't be, if the federal government, if you're on one hand saying the federal government shouldn't be in people's personal business, we need to get rid of a lot of that federal oversight, how can you then turn around and say the federal government should be responsible for paying for sex changes for people who feel like they want to transition over to the opposite sex physically? That made no sense to me. Kamala Harris' campaign was a ridiculous example of political acumen. It couldn't have been any worse. It couldn't have been any worse. If you didn't see this coming, you were an absolute fool, or you were somebody who had no political acumen or insight whatsoever. They ran a horrible campaign. All the issues that she pointed to, right? And I want you to know that in the face of who Donald Trump has shown himself to be, the Democratic Party, they had all the information they needed to mount a real campaign for Kamala Harris, but they didn't. And what that shows you is the lack of genuine understanding that the people who run the Democratic Party have. And I don't know for the life of me how that could be, because you have polls for everything. There's a poll for what fucking day of the week it is. There's a poll for what do you use mayonnaise or sandwich spread. There's a poll for do people who eat hot dogs like mustard or ketchup. There's a poll for do you like to eat pork or beef. So how in the fuck could the Democratic Party have ignored all of the obvious signs of failure? Let me tell you something. Kamala, so when you're a sitting vice president, you're already at a disadvantage, because everything that the president who you served, everything, every policy, every decision that president makes becomes a reflection of you. As a vice president, you really never get to step outside of the shadows of who you serve as president. The Democratic Party knew that Joe Biden was not qualified from a physical standpoint to walk into this election cycle, but yet they allowed it to happen anyway. You know why they allowed it to happen? Racism, sexism, misogyny. If you think the Democratic Party don't got no racism in it, you a goddamn fool. If you think the majority of men who claim to be Democrats want to see a black woman in office, I don't give a fuck how much the corporate world props up black women over black men to destabilize us so that the black women are making decisions and black men are relegated to being non-leaders of the black community. I don't give a fuck about none of that. If you think even black men know we don't want no bitch telling us what to do, we don't want no bitch, no man in America. I'm speaking for all men. Black, white, Indian, Bangladeshi, Chaldean, Arab, don't matter. Men in America don't want to be told what to do by no bitch. We weren't ready for that, Mala. Mala, you lost that election because of all the mistakes that the Democratic Party made. One, not switching up that motherfucker Joe Biden during the midterm elections, making it clear that you were running, making it clear that he had all his support behind you, and then turning that campaign dollars, right? Turning the actual campaign, advertising, promotional campaign up for Kamala Harris. They didn't do that, right? But the bigger issue is, don't no man in America want to be told what to do by no bitch. Sorry. I don't like when my bitch holler at me. My bitch holler at me, I'm ready to slap her. Don't no man in America, Indian, Chinese, Korean, Nigerian, Yugoslavian, Italian, Japanese, Jamaican, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Vietnamese, Bengali, Southeast Asian Island Pacificer, Guam. Don't no man in America want to be told. We ain't ready to be told what to do by the. We already been told what to do by our bitches anyway. We don't want no bitch to control no nuclear weapons. These bitches be on our phone. We can't even keep our bitch nosy. Don't no man in America want to be told what to do by no big mouth bitch. I'm sorry. That's why Kamala Harris lost. Bitch gonna be all in my phone. Can you imagine if she would have won? Bitch be all in America's phone. Her first piece of legislation was all women should have rights to go through their man phone. No, bitch, no. Stop the presses right there. You tuned into the Best of Dogface TV podcast. Y'all know what it is. Presidential election 2024. The Republican Party won by a landslide across the political spectrum. The presidency, red. The U.S. Senate, red. The House, red. And we already have a heavily red favored U.S. Supreme Court. So they control everything. Right? And it all happened because we don't want to be told what to do by no bitch. How dare you call Kamala Harris a bitch? How dare you, dog face? You can't call that sister no bitch. I call a bitch, and a bitch, and a bitch, and a bitch again. Bitch. Fuck is wrong with you? I don't want to be told what to do by my own bitch. So what do you think I want to be told what to do by a bitch running the whole country? We ain't ready for that. America is not that mature. We ain't. And in the black community, we already been told what to do by the bitches, man. Bitch already thinks she running us. The black community is the only community in this country where women will stand toe-to-toe with their man and call them a bitch, call them sassy, call them the queen, call them messy, all that. You don't see no Vietnamese woman standing face to face with no Vietnamese man calling him sassy. You know why? Because he'll chop that bitch down on the ground. Do you see Jamaican women standing face to face with Jamaican men and call them bitches and hoes? No, you know why? You see Haitian women. You see Puerto Rican women standing face to face with their man saying, fuck you. Now, Puerto Rican women are some aggressive, mouthy motherfuckers, but they know when to shut the fuck up. They do. You see Chaldean women standing face to face with Chaldean man telling him to shut his bitch ass up and fuck you and you ain't gonna do shit. Do you see Arab women standing face to face with their man telling their man to shut the fuck up? You don't see that. The only way you see that at is black women. So since Kamala is black, we straight on that. No, we okay.